Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us during Florida Shine's Virtual College Week. My name is Nashla Dawari, and I will be facilitating today's session, Bright Future Scholarship Information, where you'll learn all you need to know about your options, the requirements, and what it takes to become eligible for a Bright Future Scholarship. Now, before I begin, I want to go over a few items with you. If you have any questions today, please put them in the questions section, and we will address them during the live Q&A or in a follow-up email. Now, keep in mind, due to the nature of financial aid, we ask that you do not include your personal information in your question, and if you have a very specific question, our speaker will be in contact with you, and he will share his contact information at the end of the session so you can follow up with him directly. Closed captioning is provided for this session. You can click on the link in the chat box to access it. The session will also be recorded, and the recorded session, along with any materials shared today, including the presentation, will be posted online at floridashines.org. Finally, we are live on Twitter, so feel free to share your comments and connect with us at FL Shines. Now, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Pedro Hernandez. He is currently one of our outreach representatives at the Office of Student Financial Assistance. He brings valuable work experiences from his financial aid and student loans background. We are very excited to have you with us today, Pedro, to learn everything we need to know about Bright Futures and financial aid. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to assist Florida families understand the entire financial aid process, specifically when it comes to the Florida Bright Future Scholarship Program. So with that in mind, thank you. Just gonna wait here a second to have access to the presentation.
Pedro, you may use your arrows if that's easier. There we go.
There it is. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pedro Hernandez. As indicated, I will guide you through the entire presentation this afternoon. As indicated, we will be holding off to questions to the very end, and I will provide my direct contact information so you could email me, contact me via phone, whatever your preference is going to be. But today's presentation is basically on the Florida Bright Futures Program. And so by the end of this session, what we're going to have you do is be able to locate the Bright Future Scholarship Program and its eligibility requirements for all three levels. We're going to hopefully have everyone understand specific Bright Futures award level requirements and the evaluation process and how to actually apply for each of those scholarships. When it comes to the Florida Bright Future Scholarship, we recommend and we guide everyone to our homepage, which is floridastudentfinancialaid.org. Let me repeat that again, floridastudentfinancialaid.org. And after that, if you hit the scholarship grants and application button, you'll be driven to this page, which has all of the information on every state scholarship and grant program. As you can see here, we have highlighted the Bright Future Scholarship Program, which you can able to click, and it's going to give you a wealth of information. But in addition to that, I want to make reference to, on the upper left-hand side, the What's New button. This is very important because this is where you can actually get true updated information after every legislative session on what the actual criteria is going to be to qualify for the Florida Bright Future Scholarship, and in addition, what the actual funding model is going to be for that academic year. So once again, I want to make sure that you are eligible to have and access this information very relevantly, very reliably. Now, when it comes to the Florida Bright Future Scholarship Program, as indicated, once you click on the Florida Bright Futures Program, you're going to be linked to this page, which has the Florida Bright Futures Handbook. And as you can see, the Florida Handbook is composed of 3 chapters. Chapter 1 is the initial eligibility requirements. And we highlight this link because that's going to give you access, written access, so you could actually review everything that we're talking about here tonight and have it readily available in actually written format. You can access, this is going to be your actual handbook that has every requirement, all the presentation information that we're doing today. Secondly, the chapter 2 is information to know now that the student is eligible, and Chapter 3 is renewing your actual award. And at the very bottom of the actual very specific Florida Bright Futures Scholarship page, you're going to see the Florida Bright Futures award amounts. These are the updated award amounts for each qualifying student once the actual legislative session has passed and their funding for that academic year. Now, how to apply? When it comes to applying for the Florida Bright Future Scholarship, it is mandated to complete a Florida Financial Aid application, or the FFAA application. That application opens every single year of a student's senior year, starting October 1st. In this case, if your student is a senior this year, the application opened up October 1st, and the last day to complete it is August 31st of 2018, or August of the graduation year. Students must complete it, of course, no later than August 31st to qualify to meet qualifications for that academic year that the student actually graduated. The student only needs to submit one application, and once the student submits it during their senior year in high school, they will then be considered for not only the Bright Future Scholarship, but for every state grant and scholarship available through the Florida Department of Education Office of Student Financial Assistance. The website, once again, that we highly recommend to go to is floridastudentfinancialaid.org. To actually submit the application, you will select State Grant Scholarships and Applications. Then you would select the Application and Updates tab. Then you would select the Florida Financial Aid application and submit this application. On average, this application takes no longer than 15 to 30 minutes to complete for every high school student. Very easy application to complete. If you should have any questions or concerns, we have 1-800 number, and now you're going to have my direct contact information to assist you in completing this application. When it comes to meeting its requirements, the actual requirements are going to be, there are certain general requirements, and there's very specific requirements for each level. When it comes to general requirements, the general requirements are that to be eligible, a student must be a Florida resident and a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen as determined by the student's post-secondary institution. So resident status resides within the post-secondary institution. A student must complete the Florida Financial Aid application, once again, no later than August 31st of their senior year, and the student must earn a standard Florida high school diploma or its equivalency from a Florida public high school or registered private school. Additional general requirements. The student must have not been found guilty of or pleaded nolo contendere to a felony charge, and has to be accepted by and enrolled in a Florida degree or certificate program at an eligible Florida public or independent post-secondary institution within 2 years of high school graduation. Now, they must also enroll in at least 6 non-remedial semester hours or its equivalent in clock hours per actual term. Now, when it comes to the Florida Bright Future very specific scholarships, there are basically 4 scholarships that the student can qualify for, but the student may receive only funding for one of the Florida Bright Future Scholarships awards. Now, those scholarships are independently. The first one is the Florida Academic Scholars, the Florida Medallion Scholars, and under Gold Seal, we now have 2 scholarships. We have the Florida Gold Seal Vocational Scholars and the Florida Gold Seal CAPE Scholars. And we're going to outline exactly the qualifications for each of those scholarships in the upcoming slides. When it comes to the Florida Academic and the Florida Medallion award requirements, they are as follows. The student has to take their entrance exams by, if they are midterm graduates, they have to take their exams by January 31st for early evaluation, or through June 30th for the final evaluation. That means that your student that's in high school right now, if they want to be early evaluated, that means a 7th semester evaluations, they need to take all their college entrance exams, SAT, ACT, by January 31st. If not, they have until June 30th, and that might be past their high school graduation date, but they still have until June 30th to submit college entrance exams. Other ways to qualify. That means students who have demonstrated academic merit for those scholarships, they, hold on, it's going a little too fast. Now, in addition to those scholarships, the students who meet the requirements can also qualify if they are or have demonstrated academic merit through recognition programs such as the National Merit Finalist Scholars, National Hispanic, the Advanced International Certificate of Education, or an ACE diploma, or an International Baccalaureate diploma. If the student takes those classes and graduates with those diplomas, they qualify. They don't need a qualifying GPA or test scores. They would then just have to submit this additional service hours that are required in this chart to actually submit and qualify for those scholarships. For example, National Merit Finalist would then have to still submit 100 service hours for the Florida Academic or 75 service hours. The same thing would happen for the National Hispanic Scholar, the ACE diploma, and the IB diploma student. Now, if a student is, however, in an ACE curriculum or an IB curriculum, the student still must meet the qualifying college entrance exam scores to qualify, in addition to the service hours for that actual level of the scholarship. Now, when it comes, let me just review a couple things just briefly. In addition to that, in addition to qualify for the Florida Academic Scholar and the Florida Medallion Scholar, if the student takes the traditional classes, which are 4 math classes, 4 English classes, 3 social science, 3 biological science, and 2 consecutive world languages, those students would also qualify for the scholarship. That's one criteria. The second criteria is the students would have to obtain, to receive a Florida Academic Scholar, would have to obtain with just within those core classes a 3.5 weighted GPA. For the Florida Medallion, it is those same core classes of 4 math classes, algebra 1 or higher, 4 English classes, 3 social science, 3 biological science, and 2 consecutive world languages, and obtain a 3.0 weighted GPA for those classes. Now, in addition to that, the student would have to submit qualifying community service hours or service hours. For the Florida Academic, it is 100 service hours. For the Florida Medallion, it is 75 service hours. And of course, meet the qualifying test scores. For the Florida Academic Scholar, it would be a 29 ACT, or a 1290 SAT. For the Florida Medallion, it is a 26 ACT and 1170 SAT. We at the Florida Department of Education, Office of Student Financial Assistance, we super score your test scores. That means that if the student takes either the SAT or ACT in consecutive opportunities or consecutive tries, we will take their best subcomponent score of each of those tests. As long as the student meets the overall composite, they're going to qualify for those tests. And remember, it is an either or. The student has to either meet it via the SAT or ACT requirement. In addition to that, there is the Gold Seal Vocational Award requirements. The Gold Seal Vocational Scholars, this criteria must be met through meeting the general requirements. The student needs to achieve a 3.0 GPA in the non-elective high school classes. They must take at least 3 credits in a single career technical education program, and then within those 3 credits, they must obtain a 3.5 weighted GPA. They can also take the SAT, ACT, or the Florida Post-Secondary Education Readiness Test, or the PERT exams, to qualify. And we're going to see those corresponding scores for this specific award level. And in addition to that, they must also complete 30 service hours. So in order to qualify under the Gold Seal Vocational Scholars, students must meet the following test scores. I'm not going to read them all to you, but they are also in the Bright Futures Handbook. So these are the qualifying SAT, ACT, the SAT revamped test scores that were effective as of after March 1st of 2016, and the qualifying PERT or test scores as well. When it comes to Gold Seal Vocational Scholars, Gold Seal Vocational Scholars, unlike the Florida Academic and the Florida Medallion, awards may only be used at post-secondary institutions that offer applied technology diplomas, technical degree educational programs, or a career certificate programs. That means that those students are going to be in a majority of the time in either clock hour programs or programs that are in those very specific degrees that they're offering. That once again, they're going to only offer funding for applied technology diplomas, technical degree education programs, and career educational certificate programs. Now, under the Gold Seal CAPE Scholars, those recipients who wish to qualify for the CAPE Scholars Award must meet the following criteria. They must meet the general requirements for Bright Futures, earn a minimum of 5 post-secondary credit hours through CAPE industry certifications, which articulate to a college credit, and complete 30 service hours prior to high school graduation. Now, the difference is that students who complete or qualify under the CAPE Scholars can also now be funded an additional 60 hours of credit once they receive their AS degree or their AAS degree and apply it towards a Bachelor of Science program. So, as an example, a student initiates with a clock hour program, goes on to get their AS degree. If they qualify under the CAPE Scholars, that student will now be able to get 60 hours or its clock hour equivalent towards their degree in pursuing of a Bachelor's of Science degree program, whereas the Gold Seal Vocational Scholarship stops at 60 hours of credit hour funding or its clock hour equivalent. Early and final evaluations. When do evaluations take place? Evaluations here done at the Florida Department of Education Office of Student Financial Assistance are completed twice a year. Early evaluation, that means the determination is based on the coursework, GPA, through the first half of their senior year, or what's commonly known as the 7th semester. That means coursework is going to be evaluated that's in progress for the 8th semester, service hours completed by January 31st, and entrance exam scores taken through January 31st. That's when the first evaluation is done. Final evaluation is basically once the actual required coursework and GPA through the end of their senior year to the last day of semester, and service hours are completed through high school graduation, and test scores are taken all the way up to June 30th of the student senior year. Now, a lot of times I always get the question asked of, my students need to have basically 5 criteria met for all scholarships. They need to have their classes taken, GPA, community service or service hours, test scores, and the application that we mentioned. When it comes to the 5 criteria, they have to be met by certain times. When it comes to the classes taken, GPA, and service hours, they have to be accomplished by either the mid-year 7th, even through the first half for high school early evaluation, or by the actual last day of attendance for their final evaluation. Test scores are going to be all the way up through June 30th, and their online application, of course, is August 31st of their senior year. But a lot of times, the primary question that we have from a majority of students is, if my student submits their actual Florida financial aid application today, even if they submit it today, we are still going to consider your students, the classes that they take, their GPA, their community service, all the way up through high school graduation. We're going to take their actual test scores for the ACT, all the way up through June 30th, and of course their online application all the way up through August 31st. So even if they submit their actual Florida financial aid application today, that requirement is fulfilled. They only need to meet all the other following requirements to qualify for that scholarship and that certain level of scholarship that the student is trying to achieve. Now, when it comes to notifications, when a student goes online to our actual application, they submit their application, they are going to receive what's called a user ID and password. From that point on, the student can log back into the system to make any changes to the school that they want this information sent to, or to any of their demographic information. But in addition to that, they have the ability to view what's called their financial aid recipient history, or the FARH screen. That is very important because once a student gets determined to be eligible in a certain program, that's where we're going to update their actual award status. That's whether they qualified for the Florida Academic, Florida Medallion, Gold Seal, or Gold Seal Vocational Scholarship. They have access to this information, once again, once they submit their application, which creates a user ID and password for the student. Once again, application and updates. If you go to our login page, which is floridafinancialaid.org, you're going to go under applications and updates. For returning students, they're going to click there where it says returning students login here. For new students, the screen right above is for the Florida Financial Aid application. That is where they can actually submit their initial application, so that you have information on how to actually submit your information and how to actually change or add schools to your Florida Financial Aid application. Now, in addition to that, we just want to make sure and communicate the fact that when your student receives a report card under Florida Statute 1009.531, subsection 4, public high school students' report card must contain a disclosure that the grade point average calculated for purposes of the Bright Future Scholarship may differ from the grade point average on that report card. So just make sure that you are aware that this information that you receive on your report card might be different from the actual calculation that we're utilizing to evaluate you for the Florida Bright Future Scholarship. Now, award amounts. I briefly talked about award amounts. The students will receive the specific or specified award amount established annually by the Florida legislation in the General Appropriations Act. That means that funding is going to begin the following fall after high school graduation, and the post-secondary institution is going to determine when your students are going to receive your Bright Future Scholarship dollar amounts, or any of the state scholarships, or your Gold Seal Vocational Scholarships. Once again, the actual post-secondary institution is going to actually determine those dates for your students. And if you wanted to get an advance viewing of what actually students are receiving today, we recommend you go to our website for the current award amounts. Right now it is at floridastudentfinancialaid.org, SSFAD, Bright Futures, and FMANHTM. Will actually, this website will, if you click on it, will take you to the actual website that outlines all the scholarship dollar amounts that are posted right now. If you want more information, our website has a plethora of information available to you. Our main website, once again, is floridastudentfinancialaid.org. Our customer service number is 888-827-2004. Our general email box is osva@fldoe.org. My name is Pedro Hernandez. You can reach me directly at pedrohernandez@fldoe.org. I could fill in more. And if you want to jot down my phone number, my direct line is area code 850-245-1821. So at this moment, we have a couple moments to spare, which gives us more time for any questions and answers. Shall we begin?
Thank you, Pedro. Yes, I'd like to invite our audience to send your questions in for Pedro. And as we prepare for those questions, we already have a few in the queue, Pedro, for you. I just want to reiterate your message from earlier that a good place to start, or really the place to start, is floridastudentfinancialaid.org. And then from there, what most students probably didn't know before your presentation, and they know now, is that in addition to the FAFSA, the federal financial aid application, they have to complete the Florida financial aid application, and that's how this whole process starts. So thank you for sharing that information. We appreciate it. Pedro, the first question is related to timing. So for an 11th grader, is right now the time for them to sign up for it or apply?
No, actually what we recommend, if you have an 11th grader now, what we ask them to do is concentrate primarily on taking all the required courses that they need to qualify for the scholarship, taking their SAT, ACT qualifying scores so they have those readily available, and doing their community service hours. So next year, when October comes of their senior year, on October 1st, they could go online, submit that information, and they have then completed their requirement to be evaluated for a Florida Bright Future Scholarship. As high school juniors, we do not recommend going on this year because it's not going to go anywhere. That application is geared specifically for high school seniors. Now, if your junior, though, is planning to graduate, have an early graduation, or is going to be a mid-year graduate, that means next year going to graduate in December, we do highly recommend that student, yes, go indeed and actually fill out that application today, because that student has until August 31st to submit their application if they want to qualify for the spring of 2019 financial aid. That means the student is going to be graduating December of 2018, enrolling in college in the spring of 2019. The student could then qualify for financial aid, Bright Future Scholarship at that point, if they're a mid-year graduate.
Gotcha. And so, Pedro, just to reiterate, there were a couple other questions related to timeline. So a student graduating in May 2019, what is the time frame in terms of month and year that they have an open application to apply?
Correct. If the student is graduated in 2019, basically 2 years from now, remember, it is, as of today, it's going to be October 1st of their senior year. So if the student is graduating in June or May of 2019, that means October 1st of 2018, that application is going to open up for the student. That means October of the student's senior year, that is when that application opens up. They're going to have until the following August 31st to submit this application. But once again, in the meantime, for those students, we recommend make sure they are taking all the required coursework, obtaining the appropriate GPA, prepping and taking their SAT or ACT scores to meet qualifying criteria. And remember, one of the most important things for this year's seniors, this year's juniors, this year's sophomores, is that every legislative session could change the actually requirements for the Bright Future Scholarship. That's why we review, make sure that they change, but you're trying to acquire at least these minimum requirements to meet that scholarship eligibility. And check back every single year to know what this year's senior qualifications are going to be.
Okay, so thank you, Pedro, for the clarification. We got most questions related to that topic. And so again, the scholarship doesn't only apply for the fall term. It can be used for spring and summer. And the benefit is not necessarily applying early, but making sure that students are preparing as much as possible, because really the window of application should be that senior year, correct?
That is correct.
Wonderful. Pedro, in regards to the actual scholarship, is it based on family income?
No, and that is a very important question. When it comes to the Florida Bright Future Scholarship, whether it is the Florida Academic Scholar, the Florida Medallion, the Gold Seal, or the Gold Seal Vocational Scholarship, or the Gold Seal Cape Scholarship, all of these scholarships are merit-based. They have absolutely nothing to do with income of a student or a parent as of this year. So all of these scholarships, if the student meets the requirements, it is not associated or it is not a need-based scholarship. It is strictly a merit-based scholarship. So if the student meets all of the requirements, enrolls in, once again, a Florida school, they are going to qualify for that scholarship. One thing to remember is the majority of the scholarships, Florida state scholarships and grants, including the Florida Bright Future Scholarship, do not travel out of the state of Florida. They are intended for Florida students or otherwise eligible students who are enrolling in Florida schools, who are graduating from Florida schools and enrolling in Florida schools.
Thank you, Pedro. And so once the student applies, when do they typically learn if they've earned a scholarship? And then once they know that information, what does it usually cover? Is it restricted to only tuition, or can they use it for housing and textbooks and any other things outside of the tuition cost?
Correct. Now, one thing that we're going to have to review is, once again, every legislative session, the Florida legislation is going to dictate what exactly is going to be covered, is going to be funded for the student who is presently at either a Florida Academic, Florida Medallion, or Gold Seal Vocational Scholarship. Now, after that, because this is a merit-based scholarship, these funds are going to go. The student's going to enroll at a Florida qualifying institution. We're going to, by the student submitting and meeting all the qualifications, including that online application, we're gonna basically fulfill a master eligibility list for the school. The school is then gonna communicate with the student on when they actually are gonna disperse those funds to the student. Now, because that changes every single year, we now know, as of today, what the qualifications are for this year's high school graduates, and we know the funding for current existing students. At the end of next legislation session, we're going to know the actual funding for existing college students and next year's high school seniors. Now, when it comes to when do you know if you qualified? If a student meets qualifications, remember, we're doing downloads of the student's qualifications from the schools twice a year. At the end of the seventh semester, or after January 31st, we're going to get that first batch of all the information that your student is taking. If they qualified at that time, we'll notify the student. If not, the student has until, once again, graduation date to submit all the qualifying classes, GPA, and service hours. They still have until June 30th of their senior year to submit qualifying test scores. And they have until August 31st to submit their online application.
Thank you, Pedro. We're getting lots of good questions, so we're trying to group them together to make sure we cover all of the topics related to Bright Futures. The next piece is related to ACT and SAT scores. So can you qualify for FAS or FMS with an IB diploma even without ACT or SAT scores?
Yes, that is correct. On the matrix itself, if you have, once again, an IB diploma, the matrix currently indicates that you don't have to have qualifying test scores. You're going to have, but you are still going to have the hours. That means that you're going to still do the community service hours, have them documented through your high school guidance counselor, report them in, and if we get notification that you are indeed an IB or an ACE diploma recipient, it's going to match up in our system, but it's still going to look for the qualifying service hours for the student to qualify for that scholarship.
Okay, and so outside of IB and ACE, can you tell us, and you may or may not know, how the capstone program affects or plays with this scholarship?
I do not know. I could look that up and get back to you on that. If that person would email me directly, I could give back that information to them.
Absolutely, we will make a note.
And also, that just reminds me, I'm sorry, I just wanted to also reiterate, but everyone listening, I just want to absolutely make sure, when it comes to students, if the student does receive either an IB or an ACE diploma, that is significantly different than if they're in the IB curriculum or the ACE curriculum. If they're just in the curriculum and do not receive the actual diploma, students still have to meet the qualifying either SAT or ACT test scores to qualify for the Florida Bright Future Scholarship.
That's a very good distinction. Absolutely, yeah. Now, outside of those programs, Pedro, for Bright Futures, if you don't meet the criteria for SAT and ACT, can you still possibly receive the award? Meaning, can you still apply? Are you still in the running based on only GPA and community service hours and coursework criteria?
No, the Florida legislation once again establishes all the criteria that has to be met for each qualifying level of the Florida Bright Future Scholarship. So each of those criteria have to be met in order for the student to qualify for that scholarship. So it's basically the 5 criteria. They have to meet the classes taken, GPA, community service or service hours, test scores, and the actual online application.
Okay, great to know. And so to reiterate, I know we have a few other questions related to that. There are no exceptions if one of the requirements is not met. And I was, sorry, Pedro, I was making sure you could confirm that. Thank you.
That is correct. It is legislatively mandated for that student to meet those requirements.
Gotcha. Pedro, in regards to volunteer hours and credit hour, or I'm sorry, volunteers and community service hours, does the requirement for the 100 hours, is that something that they need to accumulate per year or for the entire time that they're in high school? And how do they submit proof that they've completed that volunteer work?
Correct. The 100 for the Florida Academic and the 75 for the Florida Medallion and the 30 for the Gold Seal Vocational Scholarships are submitted and approved through the student's high school guidance department, and every county in the state of Florida has those criteria and those standards that the student must meet in order to qualify for qualifying community service hours or service hours. So even though we give general guiding principles, every district, every school district, and every guidance counselor can have specific criteria that the student needs to meet in order to make sure that they qualify for those hours. They are also the department that takes in those hours, documents those hours, and they send them to us via as well as your transcript, and that's how we receive the hours of community service that you have performed. So this is very important because the majority of, there have been students that have done numerous community service hours, but they have never documented them or communicated them with their high school guidance counselor. So on our system, it's still showing up that they have no community service hours. So it's vitally important that you check and you verify and get them pre-approved before you actually do those community service hours or service hours for your high school guidance counselor.
Thank you, Pedro. And I'm going to ask for your assistance here in clarifying because we have some questions related to the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, and whether or not it's the same thing. And so I want to clarify and make sure that our audience knows that they're not. So the federal financial aid application is different than the Florida financial aid application, and students need to apply for both if they're looking at more options. But for Bright Futures, they need to fill out the Florida financial aid application as a first step. Is that correct?
That is correct. And it's also vitally important that we communicate correctly that the free application for federal student aid or the FAFSA, it is not mandated to receive the Florida Bright Future Scholarship. It is not mandated that you complete it at all. However, if you want to be evaluated for financial aid, which is defined as any and all money that comes from either the federal government, state agencies, institutions, that FAFSA form is filled out. However, specifically for the Bright Future Scholarship Program, it is not mandated. However, the Florida Financial Aid application, which is a totally different application from the free application for federal student aid, the Florida Financial Aid application, or the FFAA, is once again mandated to receive the Florida Bright Future Scholarship. If students do not complete that application, they do not meet the qualifying requirements and therefore are not going to qualify for the Florida Bright Future Scholarship. We encounter this problem numerous times when the majority of students think that they are going out of state and that they're never, ever coming back to the state of Florida. If that is the case, if you have a student that is thinking about going out of state, still have them meet this requirement, because students who qualify, who meet all the qualifications for the Florida Bright Future Scholarship, even if they don't utilize it, they have 2 years from high school graduation to actually initiate the program. So if a student goes out of state, and we a lot of times get them that they go up to New York, up to University of Michigan, and it snows 9 months out of the year, and they come back to defrost in sunny Florida, if they didn't fill out that Florida financial aid application, they are not eligible for the Florida Bright Future Scholarship to reinitiate it when they get back. However, if the student did fill that application out, when they did receive back, they could apply for reinstatement of that application and proceed to actually get the Florida Bright Future Scholarship that they received or that they earned through its merit components.
Thank you, Pedro. And so in the interest of time, I just want to ask a few more questions from our audience related to qualifying. And so does qualifying for the scholarship guarantee that they will actually receive the award? And is there a certain number of monies or awards that are given for those who qualify?
Okay. Once again, when after every legislative session, the Florida legislation, once they go enact and they pass the actual laws and the governor signs them, it actually then is going to dictate what the current Bright Future students that are receiving Florida Bright Futures, what their funding level is going to be, and what the criteria is for this year's junior class or next year's seniors class in order to qualify. When a student receives or qualifies for that scholarship, for example, we're just going to give an example of last year's students. If last year's students qualified for a Florida Academic Scholar, this year the funding is 100% of tuition and fees paid for at either a state college or state university, or its equivalent at a private institution at the state university level. That is, if a student graduated last year with a Florida Academic Scholar and received that funding. Now, can it change this year? Can it change? Once again, that's up to the legislative session to set the funding for next year's qualifying student at all levels, the Florida Academic, Florida Medallion, and Gold Seal, and what the high school graduation criteria is going to be to indeed qualify for the Florida Bright Future Scholarship at the individual levels, at the Florida Academic, Florida Medallion, and the Gold Seal Vocational Scholarship.
Thank you, Pedro. And we have just a few more seconds for one last question. And then again, I want to remind our audience that anything that we did not answer that was specific, we will follow up with you individually after today's webinar. But where can students go to check if their community service hours have been received and how many have been submitted towards the Bright Futures evaluation?
Definitely. We always recommend they could go on our system, and if they could either call our office, and we're going to say what has been transmitted from the high school via the high school transcript from their freshman year, sophomore, junior, and senior year, and we're going to show all the information that came from the transcripts, how much information is on there. We also recommend go to your high school guidance counselor. They're also going to have that information readily available to them. So they're going to have that information. Now, if there is a discrepancy between what's on our system and what's at your guidance counselor, that can happen because remember, we're only uploading twice a year at the end of January and after graduation. So if you're mid-semester and you have submitted an extra 50 hours of community service, we're not going to reflect that until after January 31st or after June or after high school graduation. So just make sure that you're aware of that. So you can either come to our site, contact our customer service, but we highly recommend talk to your guidance counselor to see exactly how many service hours or community service hours you have on file with them.
That's very good because it may not necessarily be updated right away. So good to know, Pedro. Thank you so much for sharing such a wealth of resources. Again, any questions that we did not get to today during today's webinar, we will be following up with individually. We've also provided Pedro's information and email address and the Office of Student Financial Assistance email address there for you to connect with them directly on any specific questions that you have related to Florida's financial aid options and your Bright Futures eligibility. As a reminder to our audience, the recorded session, along with all the materials and links that Pedro shared with us today, will be posted on our website at floridashines.org. Now, if you'd like to learn more about the FAFSA and other financial aid options, I would like to invite you to join us tomorrow at 4 o'clock during a live webinar, part of Virtual College Week, to learn more again about FAFSA, the Federal Financial Aid Application, and other financial aid options. So you can sign up for those sessions and any other topics at virtualcollegeweek.org. Again, Pedro, thank you so much for sharing this information today. We learned a lot about Bright Futures and Florida's financial aid options. And thank you all very much for joining us today. Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone.